to receive emails from ladies that are living in other countries. And many of these countries are third world countries. I've received letters from ladies in Pakistan, Iran, Peru, Belgium, places like that, where there is very little Bible teaching and very few, if any, sound doctrinal churches. And so I get emails and I'll get questions that they'll ask me, and they're kind of cute. But anyway, one particular email this past summer caught my eye because it pertained to one of the verses that we're going to cover tonight. And so by way of opening, I want to read just a portion of her email. I'm not going to read all of it because her email was very lengthy. It goes like this. She says, "Well, sorry if I'm writing too much. I will go to the point. I have disregarded many of the prohibitions of my former church as false teachings. But there are some I'm not so sure. They consider to dye hair as a sin. I'm not so young now. I'm almost 40, and my hair is still black, but it's becoming gray. I think in USA it's different, but here in Lima, Peru, the majority of women used to dye their hair unless they are very poor or from some Pentecostal churches, or if they're very, very old. Sometimes I feel a little ashamed. I have to find a new job soon, and I think my hair could be an issue. But I don't want to offend my God nor go against my conscience. I have read arguments in every way about this, and I've been thinking that maybe I could have been too legalistic. Maybe you know some of the arguments. I would mention Matthew 5:36, Proverbs 16:31, and Irenaeus wrote against makeup. Please, you are a Bible teacher and a woman, and I think you can help me to clarify this issue. Sorry again if I take your time for such an issue. God bless you abundantly." Now, the verse that this young girl is, I call her young because she's 40 and I'm going to be 60 soon, but the verse that this young girl cites is Matthew 5:36. That's part of our text for tonight. What did Jesus mean exactly when he says, "You shall not swear by your head because you cannot make one hair white or black"? Was Jesus condemning that women or men dye their hair? What does he mean exactly? Well, let's read the passage together and discover just what Jesus meant by these words. Read Matthew 5:33-37 along with me if you would. He says, "Again, you've heard it was said to those of old, 'You shall not swear falsely, but perform your oaths to the Lord.' But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by his earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. You shall not swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes and your no, no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one." Now, as we consider our topic tonight, truth or consequences, we have a threefold outline. First of all, we're going to look at the command not to lie in verse 33, the command not to lie. Secondly, the creative ways of lying, verses 34-36. And then lastly, the consequence of lying, from verse 37. Now, I see several of you tonight were not here last week, and that's fine, but we looked at the sin of adultery last week, and we saw that Jesus equated lust with adultery. And we also learned that the solution for adultery is to mortify the deeds of our flesh. And we saw that for any sin, and I gave you some helps on that. What did Jesus mean when he said, pluck out your eye, cut off your arm? And so we saw that Jesus is not talking about self-mutilation, but mortifying the deeds of the flesh. In other words, you do whatever it takes to put off those life-dominating sins. And then we ended with divorce, looking at divorce. Is divorce a sin? And we saw that according to the text in Matthew, that divorce is a sin unless you divorce for sexual immorality. And then we also looked at the passage in Corinthians where Paul says, if an unbeliever departs, let him depart. And so we've been looking at this. Remember, Jesus has already begun saying, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. And then we started with wanting to murder someone. And then Jesus says, but I say if you're angry with your brother, it's the same thing. And then last week we looked at adultery and lust. And so he's been raising the bar, so to speak. and talking about not just those outward sins of murder and adultery, but also hate and lust. And he equates those with those sins. They're all sinful. And Jesus is trying to get to the issue of the heart. Because, ladies, it's our heart that matters. It's not the outward ritual things that we do. It is the issue of the heart. And so he's going to continue on, and we're going to talk about another issue tonight, another sin, and that is making oaths or promises that you have no intention of keeping, or we might put it lying. And so we're going to consider, first of all, here the command not to lie. Notice what he says. Again, you heard, it was said to them of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform your oaths to the Lord. Now, ladies, once again, Jesus calls their attention to the fact that it was heard by them that it was said of old. And we've gone over this, but you learn by repetition. And so the of old is what was written in the Old Testament, along with what the scribes and the Pharisees were teaching them. He said the same thing about murder, and he said the same thing about adultery in verses 21 and 27. This time, however, he says, you've heard it was said of old, you shall not swear falsely, but perform your oaths. Now, in order to understand what Jesus is saying here, we need to define what it means to swear falsely and what it means to perform your oaths. And actually, there are two different meanings here, and so we need to define them. To swear falsely means to make false vows. In other words, you are saying something that you have no intention of doing. You say something with your mouth, but you have no intention of doing it. Peter is a great example of this. Look over just a few chapters in Matthew chapter 26, if you would. We're going to turn to a couple of places tonight so that you can see this with your own eyes. But Matthew 26:35, if you'll recall, Jesus was talking to Peter, and Peter says, though I should die with you, I will never deny you. Remember, Peter said that, and then all the other disciples said that. But if you'll look down Matthew 26, verse 69, notice what, remember, Jesus has been arrested, and Peter's standing outside, and it says, now Peter sat outside in the court, and a maid came to him, saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied before them, saying, I do not know what you're saying. And when he'd gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again he denied it with an oath. I do not know the man. And a little later, those who stood by came and said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for your speech betrays you. And then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. And immediately a rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And of course he went out, and he wept bitterly. Now, whether Peter vowed deceptively to Jesus when he said, I will never deny you, we don't know. We have no idea whether, when he said, I will never deny you, whether he was lying or not. Maybe he had a full intention of keeping his vow to the Lord. I will never deny you. But he did not, right? He did not keep his promise to the Lord. Therefore, he swore falsely. He lied because he said, I don't know the man. I do not know the man. That was a lie. Now, some people think that swearing falsely is cussing or swearing. And that's not the meaning of the word, even though it's interesting that Peter did swear and cuss and deny the Lord all at the same time. But cussing is not a great idea either, but this is not what the text is about tonight, cussing and swearing, but has nothing to do with the task here in Matthew 5. Now, performing oaths is a little bit different word. Performing an oath means to enclose or bind together. An oath is something that would be binding, and you cannot get out of it, and hopefully you saw that in Numbers when you looked at those oaths that women take and men take. An oath is something you cannot get out of unless you are divinely hindered. Making an oath or a covenant with someone was not forbidden. In fact, it was encouraged. We have the example, remember, of Abraham when he told his servant, I want you to go find a bride for my son Isaac. And remember, they made a covenant. They made an oath together. Remember Jonathan and David. They made a covenant, an oath for their friendship. Also another one we have, which is a little bit of a debatable one, is the outcome. But remember Jephthah in Judges chapter 11, he told the Lord, he said, if you'll give me the Ammonites here in battle, he said, the first thing that I see after the battle's over, he said, I'll sacrifice it to you. And he made an oath. And remember the first thing he saw was his daughter, and it's debatable whether he actually sacrificed her on the altar or whether she just was a virgin the rest of her life and couldn't get married, but that's another debate for another time. But even God made oaths. God has made a covenant with us. Remember, we have the promise of the new covenant, that he will put his spirit within us, and he will cause us to walk in his ways. And so even God made oaths. In fact, the writer to the Hebrews says in Hebrews chapter 6:17, he says, God determining to show more abundantly the heirs of promise, the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath, that by two immutable things in which it's impossible for God to lie, who have fled for refuge, to lay hold of the hope set before us, the hope we have, an anchor of our soul. So God has made oaths to us. And so there is nothing wrong with making an oath. That is actually encouraged. The whole point of this is, all this is to validate that making oaths, making vows are not forbidden, okay? That's not forbidden. What is forbidden is doing it falsely, doing it with deception, knowing that you have no intention of keeping your promise, no intention of keeping the covenant you made or the oath you made or anything like that. Now maybe you're wondering, where is this found? When Jesus says, you've heard it was said of them of old, where is this found? Well, there isn't an exact quote like there is, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not commit adultery, as we've seen. But these are commands, this command that thou shalt not swear falsely, are taken from several different places. First of all, Exodus 27 says this, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Leviticus 19:11 and 12 says this, you shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you shall not lie, you shall not swear by my name falsely. Do not profane the name of the Lord your God. Also, Deuteronomy 23:21 says this, when you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not delay to pay it, for the Lord your God will require it of you, and it will be sin to you. But if you abstain from vowing, it will not be sin to you. With that which has gone out of your lips, you keep and perform, for you voluntarily vow to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. End of quote. In Deuteronomy 23:21 through 23. So ladies, it's very simple here in this very first verse. The command not to lie is simple. Instead of swearing falsely, not doing what I promised to do, I perform what I say I will do. And I perform my oaths to the Lord. Just like with adultery and murder, the Pharisees and the scribes, they had some fancy ways of getting around those commandments. Well, they had some fancy ways of getting around this commandment of vow-taking and oath-taking. And so Jesus confronts them in the next few verses by shattering their creative ways of lying. And by the way, we also have developed some creative ways of lying, and don't fear, I will share some of those with you in just a little bit, and we'll all probably be squirming together. You can call it whatever you like, but it's lying, and so we'll look at that in just a minute. So we turn from the command to not lie to creative ways of lying, and by the way, ladies, Jesus doesn't give these as positive examples, but these are examples that we should not follow. So let's consider the first creative way that the scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites lie. Look at verse 34. I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne. Now, at first you might say, wait a minute, this is a contradiction. Didn't Jesus say, do swear, and now he says, don't swear? I mean, what is it? Well, when he says do not swear at all, the swearing at all is defined by the creative ways they found to make oaths. So Jesus isn't forbidding that. He's just saying don't do that by these creative ways that you have found to lie. Jesus is not forbidding vows or oaths, but he's forbidding doing them with no intention of fulfilling them or doing spiritual gymnastics to get yourself out of fulfilling them. And once again, he's not talking about swearing or cussing, even though that's probably a good idea to cut that out of your vocabulary. Now, I know some religious sects, they've taken this verse, verse 34, and because of this verse, they will not take a vow or an oath in a court of law. And I'm sure you know some of those religious sects. But is that what Jesus is meaning? That when we go to court, we can't, swear on a Bible or take an oath to tell the truth? No. Otherwise, Jesus himself would have sinned, right? Because even in Matthew chapter 26, remember when he was before the high priest? And the high priest said, I'm putting you under oath by the living God. Tell me, are you the Son of God? And you know what Jesus said? Jesus said to him, it is as you say. I am who you say I am. And then he goes on to say, talking about he would see the Son of Man coming on the right hand. Also, if Jesus was forbidding this, you would have to do away with Deuteronomy 10:20, which says, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him, you shall hold him fast, and you shall take oaths in his name. So once again, he is not forbidding this at all. But the religious leaders were very creative in how they would go about this. In fact, turn over to Matthew 23. This is kind of an interesting passage here. Matthew 23, verse 16. We've already looked at Matthew 23 quite a bit in our homework because this is a classic passage of the scribes and Pharisees and their hypocrisy. And Jesus, of course, is confronting this on the Sermon on the Mount. But Matthew chapter 23, look at verse 16. Jesus says this, woe to you blind guides who say, whoever swears by the temple, it's nothing. But if you swear by the gold of the temple, you're obliged to perform it. You fools and blind. For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it's nothing. But whoever swears by the gift that's on it, he's obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it, and by all things on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits on it. Now, ladies, unfortunately, during this time, the Jews had come up with some really creative ways. In fact, they built up an entire legalistic system around the Old Testament. And if you know anything about the Jewish code, the Jewish law, the Mishnah, there's one whole thing given over to how you can get out of your vows that you make. And I mean, they were just really crazy. For example, one rabbi said, if you swear by Jerusalem, well, you're not bound to your vow. But if you swear toward Jerusalem, then you're bound to your vow. And so they had gotten in, you could swear by your beard. And I mean, they'd gotten into all kind of frivolous swearing and justification for lying. And of course, Jesus is confronting that in Matthew chapter 5 and 23. So when Jesus says swear not at all here in Matthew 5, he's referring to all the creative ways that the scribes and Pharisees would lie and try to squirm out of their oaths. And the first creative way is swearing by heaven. So I'm going to swear by heaven, and then I won't be bound to my oath. So I can make a promise to you and say, Mandy, I'm just swearing to you by heaven. I'm going to do that. But I don't have to do it because, I'm not swearing by God. Well, why shouldn't I swear by heaven? Notice what he says. Because it's God's throne. Heaven is the place where God dwells, right? It's his throne. That's where he sits. In fact, Isaiah 66:1 is clear. Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne. Earth is my footstool. And so, you can swear by heaven, but you're still swearing by God. So what the religious leaders would do, they would say this. Well, I won't swear or make a promise to or by God, but I'll do it by heaven. And then, if I can't fulfill it, well, then I'm not bound by my oath. And so, therefore, I'm not lying. But Jesus says that's crazy. He says that's crazy because heaven is my throne. That's where I am. So, to swear by heaven is to swear by God. Well, there's a second and third creative way mentioned in verse 35 that they would use to get out of being bound to their oaths. Notice the second one. Nor by the earth, for it is his footstool. So the second creative way they found to get out of their oaths or their vows was to swear by earth. Now, why can't we swear by earth? Well, notice, because it's his footstool. Isaiah 66:1 again. God said, heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. What's the earth? Well, it's the place we're on right now. It's the globe. It's all the world. And the footstool is where God rests his feet, so to speak. And of course, that's imagery. That's not real, but it's imagery for our understanding. And so Jesus says, you know what? When you swear by the earth, you're still swearing by God. Because earth is the place where I rest my feet. I own it. And so in essence, swearing by earth is swearing by God. Now, the third creative way of lying was to swear by Jerusalem. Jesus says, nope, you can't do that either. Why? Because swearing by Jerusalem is the city of the great king. Psalm 48:2 says this, beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth, is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Ladies, that's just as ludicrous as the previous two because everything belongs to God, right? Heaven, earth, Mount Zion, Jerusalem, everything belongs to him. And so their swearing by this thing or that thing and thinking it wasn't binding was ridiculous because everything belongs to God. So perhaps one of them might be thinking, well, maybe I won't swear by anything that belongs to God, but I'll swear by myself. Well, let's see what Jesus has to say about that as he gives the fourth creative way of lying in verse 36. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. Now, ladies, the reasoning here is the same reasoning as it is for the other three creative ways of lying. God owns your head too. Did you know that? He created you. So to swear by your head, well, that belongs to him too, right? He made you. Everything is his. So it doesn't matter what you swear by. You can swear by this podium, swear by this mic, swear by your Bible, swear by the chair, swear by your water you're drinking out of. It all belongs to him. So any promise, any oath you make and you try to swear by something, it's still binding. In fact, to swear by one's head was equivalent to swearing by one's life. In fact, when I was growing up, we used to say, cross my heart, hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. When you make a promise, like, what is that, But, it'd be like saying, if this thing isn't true that I'm telling you, then I'm vowing, I'll lose my very own life if it's not true. But ladies, since he made us, we can't even swear by our head. And he goes on to say, because you cannot make one hair white or black. Then you might be saying, what? Say what? Well, ladies, the biblical world was not like ours, okay? I don't know how we have gotten where we are, but nonetheless, I don't think necessarily that advancement is always the best. But in biblical times, they didn't have, Botox, facelifts, colors to color your hair and all that kind of stuff. And so they didn't have that control over the aging process. And I don't know why we think we have control over the aging process, because every morning when I get up and look in the mirror, I have no control. I look at myself and I go, seriously? I think you need to go back to bed. We don't have control over the aging process. But most of the people in the biblical world, he had either black or dark hair, unless they were older. And if they were older like I am, then their hair would be white. And Jesus says this, you have no control over the aging process. You have no control over making one hair white or one hair black. You have no control over your life, and that includes changing the color of your hair. Now, just by way of clarification, and this is what I told the girl in the email, this verse is not saying you can't dye your hair, okay? That has nothing to do with the text. The context is making vows or promises that you have no intention of keeping. So, we have no control over making one of our hairs white or black, so why do we think we can swear by a life? I'll swear by my head. How foolish is that? Ladies, we can't make divisions between what is God's and what is man's because everything belongs to him. Everything. Paul says this very clearly in Colossians. For by him all things that are created, that are in heaven, that are in earth, visible, invisible, whether they're thrones, dominions, principalities, or powers, All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things. And by him all things consist. So it doesn't matter what you swear by. It all belongs to him anyway. And you're bound to your oath whether or not you realize it or not, no matter what you swear by. Ladies, the religious leaders were guilty of what Proverbs 20:25 says, where it says this: "It is a snare for a man to devote rashly something as holy, and afterward to reconsider his vows." So, instead of all those creative ways of lying, those that are truly kingdom citizens do something else. Instead of lying, we speak the truth. And hopefully by now, Jesus' audience, along with you and I, are convinced that truth-telling is the only way to be salt and light. And if you're not convinced of that yet, then perhaps verse 37 will motivate you, because Jesus gives a consequence of those who choose to lie. Look at verse 37. "But let your yes be yes and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one." The word "but" is a contrast. Instead of making all those foolish vows, instead of making all those promises you have no intention of keeping, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no, no. Now, yes and no is a synonym for communication, what comes out of your mouth. But ladies, I would also say it should be what's in your heart and what's in your thoughts. We must be honest not only with our mouth, but what's in our mind and our heart as well. This means we don't do what the religious leaders did. We don't say yes to someone that we will do something, but actually mean no in our thoughts. In fact, yes is a strong affirmation here, and no is an absolute negative. And Jesus says, let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Otherwise, you have a consequence. And the consequence is, he says, you fall into the snare of the evil one. In fact, the correct rendering is evil, actually. I don't know what your translation says. He says, whatever is more than these comes of evil. It's evil. It's evil. Jesus says to speak anything other than truth is evil. It's wicked. In fact, his half-brother James says the same thing. But above all, my brethren, do not swear, neither by heaven, nor by earth, or by any other oath. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no, lest you fall into judgment or condemnation. So either way, judgment, condemnation, evil, none of those are good results. So when you put all these together, the consequence of making an oath or a vow and not fulfilling it is evil. And James says it will cause you to fall into judgment. Now, Solomon knew the gravity of this. He writes in Ecclesiastes 5, 4, and 5, when you make a vow to God, do not delay to pay it. For he has no pleasure in fools. Pay what you have vowed. It's better not to vow than to vow and not pay. So, summarize what we've learned and go into some questions for us to consider. The command not to lie is simple. Don't lie. Don't lie. But do what you say you will do. Now, the religious leaders of that day exhibited 4 creative ways of lying. These are not the only creative ways of lying. We've already seen some of those with their adultery, with their murder, we're going to see some more as we come along. Those are not the only creative ways, but these are the ones that Jesus gives in the text. And the consequence of lying is that it's evil. It's sinful. And it is wicked. And ladies, ongoing lying could send you to hell. Could send you to hell. Revelation 21:8 is very clear. The fearful, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, fornicators, sorceries, idolaters, and all liars have their place in the lake of fire. Or Revelation 22:15, outside are dogs, sorcerers, fornication, murderers, idolaters, and whoever loves and makes a lie. Now, I didn't say that. John said that in the book of the Revelation. So ongoing lying, if you're practicing lying, it's a sin worthy of hell and indicates that you probably are not redeemed. Now, maybe you think these words tonight, they were a little different than what we've been studying. Maybe you think, Susan, this has nothing to do with me. I don't swear by heaven. I don't swear by earth. I don't swear by the footstool. I don't do any of that. But nothing could be further from the truth. These have a lot to do with us. Because Jesus is very clear. You either tell the truth or there will be consequences. And the consequences are not good ones, because as I mentioned, all liars have their place in the lake of fire. And ladies, we've developed some very creative ways of lying. In fact, rarely a day or a week goes by that we don't make a promise to someone, right? A friend, a husband, a child. But do we keep that promise? For example, we might say to our friend, what you just told me, I promise I won't tell anybody, And then we post it on Facebook, or tell our husband, or tell our best friend. Or you promise you'll take the kids for a special treat, do something with them, and you don't fulfill your promise. Or I've had this happen to me. I haven't done it, but I've had it happen to me. Someone will tell me they'll meet me for lunch, and noon, and 12:15, they're still not there, and sometimes they don't show up at all. I've had counselors just not show up at all. Or you tell your husband, I'll iron your shirts while you're at work, but you find something better to do with your time. And we justify our broken promises by saying, well, to err is human, but God says to sin or to lie is a sin. Other examples of this, I think we've got some creative ways of lying. When you tell someone that you'll pray for him or her, do you do that? I've made it a habit. Debbie and I were talking, I think it was Debbie, maybe it was someone else who I was talking to, that I would pray right then. If you say, I'll pray for you, do it right then, because the older I get, I forget, and so just stop and pray right then. When you sign up for a job or a ministry, are you faithful to be there? When you say you'll be somewhere at 9 o'clock, are you there at 9 o'clock? When you say you'll pay your bills by the 15th of the month, do you do it? If you've ever taken an oath in court, have you told the truth? Are you keeping your marriage vows in sickness and in health, being faithful to you and you alone? Ladies, those are vows that we made on our wedding day and whatever other vows you made on that day. If you claim to be a Christian, which by the way is a vow, it's a commitment, it's a covenant you made with God, does your life show it? Can your word be trusted? When you say yes, can other people count on you? When you say no to your children, what does that mean in your home? Does no in your home mean keep pestering me and I will eventually say yes? I'm sure many of us can identify with the following quote by George MacDonald. He says this, I always try, I think I do, to be truthful. But all the time I tell a great many petty lies. Things that mean one thing to myself, though something else to other people. But I don't think lightly of it. Where I'm more often wrong is pretending I hear things which I don't, especially jokes and good stories, and the point of which I always miss. But seeing everyone laugh, I laugh too, for the sake of not looking like a fool. He says, my respect for the world's opinion is my greatest stumbling block, I fear, end of quote. We've all done that. Have you ever been around people telling jokes and you don't hear it, you don't understand it, and Doug always says, don't you get my jokes? Like, oh, I don't get your jokes. But we laugh and we didn't even hear what the joke was. Nice way of lying. And ladies, we all know people's word that is a joke. They're undependable. Everything they say goes in one ear and out the other ear. They can't be trusted. But on the other hand, there are times that we aren't able to keep our word due to unexpected circumstances. And that's why I believe it's very important when you're making promises to your children. When I say to somebody, I'll see you at night, I always say, if the Lord wills, I will be there. But I don't know, I might be divinely hindered. I had days planned this morning and I ended up taking Pam to the hospital. I had night to cancel other things. So sometimes other things trump other things. Or when our kids were growing up and they were preachers' kids, ministers' lives are very busy. And so we would plan something with our children, but we'd always tell them, if the Lord wills, this might get interrupted. But we tried as much as we could to go through with our plans, and we made it up to them later if we had to cancel for ministry purposes. But I'm afraid with some this is not the case. And it boils down to a lack of being faithful, lack of integrity, a lack of being a woman of our word. When you fail in this area, do you seek forgiveness or do you rationalize it? The world's looking for honesty, and I'm afraid they're seeing very little of it in believers. And so by way of closing, I want to give you 6 ways to ensure that your yes remains a yes and that your no remains a no. And they all begin with the word be, be, okay? Number 1, be sensitive to the deception that lying is sin. Even white lies, lady. I know people say, well, I just told a white lie. No, you didn't. You lied. Not only is this a sin, it's heinous sin. I know I would spank our children for lying probably harder than any other thing they did because I did not want them to develop the habit of lying. Don't sensitize yourself to the truth. In fact, I know people, I have a family member that lies so much they don't even know they're lying. They're just habitual liars. They lie about nothing. I mean, it doesn't even, what they had for lunch or what. It's just crazy. Number 2, be reminded of Matthew 12, 36, 37. This is a stinging verse. I say unto you, every idle word that you speak, you'll give account in the day of judgment. By your words you'll be justified, by your words you'll be condemned. So that would caution us before we speak. Number 3, be filled with God's Spirit. Be filled with God's Spirit. Ladies, if you're not walking in the Spirit, if you're not walking with the Lord, if you're grieving Him, if your voice is dull to Him talking to you or being sensitive to the leading in your life, then you're not going to be careful about the things that you say. Number 4, ask God, be asking God to make you aware of the way you deceive yourself and others. Be asking God to make yourself aware and others, how you deceive yourself and others. You might be surprised how deception plays out in your life. Ask your husband, honey, do you see any form of lying in my life? I remember one year, my husband and I held each other accountable for exaggerations. We had started noticing, we'd be with other people in a social context, and I'd say, that's not how that went. And he'd say, well, that's not. And so we talked about it, and I said, let's hold each other accountable for the next year for exaggerations. Because that's lying, embellishing a story. And so we did, and we would have this little thing between us, you're exaggerating, you're exaggerating. And so we cut that out, tried to cut that out. Number 5, be feeding on the Word of God. Be feeding on the Word of God. Ladies, when you feed your mind on the Word, it will produce what God desires, which is obedience. You want truth in the inner woman, right? You don't want to be I was talking to someone the other day, I don't want to be a legalist. We want to have truth in the inner woman. A truthful inward spirit is bound to produce truthful outward speech. And so be feeding on the Word of God so you know what is true. Number 6, be careful what you say. Be careful what you say. Ladies, think before you speak. Sometimes we just, ramble off a bunch of words. Proverbs says, in a multitude of words, transgression is unavoidable. If you've said something that's not true to someone, go to the person and correct it. I've done that many times, and believe me, after you do it time and time and time again, it kind of humbles you, and you're like, I'll just quit talking. Sometimes my husband will say, you're so quiet. We'll be in a counseling situation, and he'll say, you're so quiet. And I go, it's just better that way. Then I'll have to go back and, ask for forgiveness for something I've said. Ladies, there's only one person that I know in the whole universe who's kept every promise He's ever made, and that is our model, our example, the Lord Jesus Christ. And one of the promises that He has made is that He will return. He will keep His word. And so must we, lest we fall into judgment. Let's pray. Oh, Father, I do thank You that Your word is truth. I thank You that You are true. I thank You that You are a God who cannot lie. And Lord, I know that we are far above the scribes and Pharisees because we have a lot of creative ways of lying. And they did, but Lord, I think ours is in some ways more blatant. And I just pray, Lord, that You will help us to just be sensitive to those ways in our life where we do not speak the truth. And Lord, I pray that, we might ask our husbands if he sees any form of lying in us. And Lord, that we would be serious, just as serious about this sin as we are about murder and hate and adultery and lust. Lord, that we would not minimize the sin of lying. I fear we do. And Lord, even tonight, just watching a little bit of news before I came and just seeing how the politicians are already just changing their mind and lying. And Lord, it's just, our nation is just filled with liars. And so we don't even have good people in the government that we can follow their example. But I'm so thankful, Lord, that we have you and that you are a God who is truthful and that we can bank on what you say you will do. Bless us now as we go to our groups, and Lord, may our time be enriching and stimulating to our spiritual growth. In Christ's name.